We'll come back here in just a minute. Be thinking about a story for me because I want to hear something from you. So, John Welch.
Yes, sir.
I've had the opportunity to spend a lot of time up here with you, John.
And you called me a kin a minute ago, and that's,
you know what? And I did that
terrible.
last year as well because I was always thinking, where is your brother at and your dad? And I do that, and I don't mean, and I apologize for doing that because I've known John Welch for a long time. But John, tell us. I know you always have a story for us about what you went through growing up.
Well, when my wife Bonnie and I were both raised here in Midland, but we moved to Colorado in 1973. And I'd like to tell a story about the first time she met Craig. We had a good friend that lived over in the Sand Hills not far from Craig by the name of Joe Brogan. And I'd go help Joe some when he was moving cattle. Which brings me to another point. Raised down here, you know, you'd go to a Brandon or moving a bunch of cattle, and it was very straight-laced. You'd have coffee and you know, with your meal, and that was about it. But when I went to Nebraska, Joe would bring his cows in the fall. He would trail cows about 15 miles from the Sandhills down to the Platte River where they wintered. And the first time I went and helped him, and Bonnie went with me, I discovered the joys and the terrible temptations of something I'd never heard of before, which was peppermint schnapps. You start in on peppermint schnapps at about 7:30 when it gets kind of light and you're gathering those cows.
Is that AM or PM?
Beg pardon?
AM or PM?
Well, it's AM. and as you're trailing them, that year we had the snow kind of blowing out of the north, and I wound up with a lot of frostbite on my nose, but I never felt it. If you'll take enough peppermint schnapps, you're impervious to anything. And I asked Joe, I said, you know, I've been around a lot of cowboys all my life, and nobody would drink when you're working. Why up here? And he said, well, it's very simple. Y'all are all Southern Baptist or Methodist, and we're all Lutherans and Catholics. And so it was a little bit easier to do. But anyway, let me go back to when we met, when Bonnie met Craig. Jody, this was back when he was single. And there was a rule that I think he had. I never read it anywhere, but the rule was, I think, to work for Haythorns, you had to be at least 6'2" and weigh about 190 pounds. And he came over to go skiing. We lived in Colorado in the foothills, and it was Don Buffington and Ralph.
That's right.
Yeah, and Craig. So they came over to go skiing. They'd never been skiing before.
Yeah, just said it.
And at least I know some of them hadn't. And when they walk in, and just Bonnie and I live in this little old farmhouse, and they walk in, and here's these big burly guys, good-looking young men, and Craig had his real pretty mustache. It was darker then.
It would have been red.
Yeah, it would have been red at that time. And they introduced themselves, took their hats off, and shook Bonnie's hand. And Craig had a dozen yellow long stem roses. From that day forward, I've told Bonnie that if she ever runs away, I'm going to look for her in the Sandhills of Nebraska, because she was extremely impressed by that. We went up and we went skiing, and Don Buffington is a big boy, and we rented our skis, and his would keep coming off, so I'd just tighten those binds a little tighter, you know, every time, and we'd try it again, they'd come off, and finally I just tightened the binds on his boots up just as tight as you could get them. I was tired of having to put his skis back on. We all skied down the mountain, and we looked back up and no Don. And I thought, oh my gosh, he's broke his leg. Because that's why you have binds, so they'll come loose and you won't hurt yourself. And I kept looking directly. Here he comes. And he's walking down the mountain, just walking along like this. I thought, what in the world? And he had two skis over his shoulder, and they were broken too, right where he broke them whenever he turned. And that boy was tough, let me tell you. Big and stout. But